Let's compare the GHG emissions profiles for Old Crow and the Yukon Territory. The emissions profiles for Old Crow and the Yukon are different. In Old Crow, electricity generation is by far the largest contributor, while transportation is the largest for the Yukon. Old Crow relies on diesel for electricity generation, while the southern Yukon has renewable hydropower. Land transportation distances are relatively short in Old Crow compared to the extensive highway network of the Yukon. Heating is the second largest contributor, with both Old Crow and the rest of the Yukon relying on diesel and propane for heating. The difference between the GHG emissions of Old Crow and the Yukon Territory highlights the need for a custom plan to reduce the GHG emissions in our community. This graph presents the GHG emissions trend for Old Crow from 2010 to 2030. Emissions in 2030 are expected to increase to nearly 70% from 2010. Without Shrevia, the increase would have been higher at 85%. By 2030, the business as usual GHG emissions for Old Crow are expected to reach 4,700 tons of carbon dioxide, equivalent to 1,020 passenger cars on the road each year. There are generally two ways to reduce emissions. One approach is to replace fossil fuels with renewable energy, such as wind and solar power. The other approach is to reduce energy consumption by implementing energy efficiency and energy conservation measures.